Welcome back to the show, everybody. Our guest this evening is the opinion editor of Anymore.com, as well as the news editor of the Libertarian Institute. Of course, you can find his own show. It's the Kyle Anzalone Show, which you can find at Kyle Anzalone on YouTube. Kyle Anzalone, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. I usually have really great guests on the show. The last episode was, but other than that,
Yeah.
I've had a bunch of really great, well-known foreign policy experts. And then most recently, this guy, Alan Mosley.
Yeah, the thing is, I remember getting an invitation to do this show called the Kyle Anzalone Show, and I thought, oh, this is finally my moment in the sun has arrived. I've made the big time. And then I was reminded, actually, if they're sticking you in as the guest like right before New Year's, it's because everybody else is busy. Anyone that's worth their salt is on vacation or on location, and so we just got to fill the dead airspace. Alan, what are you doing on Friday? Tell me I'm a liar. Tell me.
No, actually, you have written in the past few weeks some of the most timely and principled, reasoned, factual op-eds on, the foreign policy news. And so, immediately after Trump designates the weapons of mass destruction as fentanyl, you're writing articles on that, timely articles on Venezuela and other issues. So I really did want to have you on because you have been writing some really, really quality stuff.
I mean, Kyle, in my defense, I went from being a drug dealer to a narco-terrorist overnight, so I felt like I should shine light on this ridiculous accusation. With that said, before we get into the serious stuff, Kyle, how was Christmas for you, buddy? How were the holidays?
I really enjoyed it. It's so much fun with the little girl this year. She's about 15 months. And so she actually gets excited to open presents like last year. She had no idea what was going on. And of course, like she's much more comfortable with family and stuff. And so you go over to the holidays and there's a bunch of people that want to spend time with her. And I get to sit on the couch and eat and watch football and drink a little bit and not have to worry about where she is 24/7. So it was like a nice, relaxing, just a lot of fun day. And she had fun and I had fun and the wife had fun. So great holidays here.
Well, I look forward to someday being comfortable around family as well. So I'm glad that she's hit it so early in life. I'm not quite there. You mentioned watching football. I'm sorry for people that have tuned in for the hardcore foreign policy analysis. Kyle, who's your team?
San Francisco 49ers.
Sorry, that was incorrect. It's America's team is, of course, the Dallas Cowboys. That's right. It's Dallas Cowboys. So we got
You're not
that
a Titans
right
fan?
No, they're the Houston Texans or the Houston Oilers. What are you talking about? I'm old enough that I'm like, what is this? What is this nonsense? No, it's ridiculous.
So my little brother too, I guess you just like being miserable. Like every Sunday you just want something to be angry about. And so you're a Cowboys fan.
Okay, so first of all, Kyle, the Cowboys won a bunch of Super Bowls in my lifetime. A lot of people never get to experience that joy.
That you remember?
Yeah, of course. Kyle, I'm 40 years old. Yes, I remember the Cowboys winning Super Bowls.
You're a couple years older than I thought. I don't remember any of the Cowboys Super Bowls.
All right.
The Rams I think it's more that
it's more that you've just blocked it out of your mind. Because it was so traumatizing for you. But yes, I do remember that. But more importantly, to answer your question, I'm gonna give you a tip because this might be a tip that you're gonna need here in a couple of weeks. For people who just love to watch football like myself, it's really better for your team to just go ahead and get eliminated. Just go ahead and get knocked right out of the whole thing so that way you can just enjoy the rest of the season with no stress or anxiety. It's just for the love of the game. You know what I mean? Come on.
There was a time where I would have felt that way, but I've somewhat fallen out of love with football from like my childhood. Some of the way they've changed the rules and the tackling hits, quarterback protection is just, if the 49ers aren't good, it's not quite as much fun to watch football anymore.
Well, I'm not going to fault you on that. Our mutual friend Joseph Solis Mullen, who I'm going to have back on the show in the near future, he's yet another guest who has written so much amazing stuff, and there's so many interesting topics to talk about with him. But I'm afraid that he's going to want to come on here and rant about Mizzou football in college and how next year is totally going to be their year. So Joseph, your time is coming, but. Before we run completely out of time and we never talked about anything, I want to talk about some of the stuff that you've written recently. We're going to cover kind of the foreign policy news du jour to end the year here. We're going to start off with, no, that's the Kyle Anzalone Show. We're going to start off with Israel has committed nearly 1,000 ceasefire violations, killing over 400 Palestinians. Now, I know that this is a topic that's been covered pretty extensively over at antiwar.com. You've written about this a number of times. And I know I also actually had an art. Imagine that. Of course, antiwar.com has covered it extensively. I wrote something for antiwar.com on this. And my take just being that we use that term ceasefire, but is it really a ceasefire when there's such a huge power disparity between one side and the other? And also that, is there really any, is it a ceasefire if there's no serious enforcement mechanism to actually maintain said ceasefire? So talk a little bit about this whole thing.
Yeah, I guess I would say that really the defining feature of a ceasefire is that there's actually an end to the bombing and the shooting and the killing and the war, which, 1,000 ceasefire violations in about 80 days would certainly suggest that Israel hasn't committed to that. Now, it's kind of hard to tell if Hamas has violated the deal. Israel has claimed on two or three occasions that Hamas fighters mounted attacks. Hamas put out statements basically saying that the people that Israel alleged carried out those attacks have been cut off from Hamas's main command center. And so there's a possibility that they ran out of food and provisions and just decided that, they were going to go out there and carry out an attack. It's possible that Hamas, for whatever reason, wanted to order this attack, or that Israeli troops were clearing tunnels in Rafah and just stumbled upon some Hamas fighters a few times. And then, they're claiming that engagement is a ceasefire violation when, these are just things that typically happen during ceasefires. And when they're successful, both sides kind of just move on past it, which hasn't happened here. Every time one of these happens, Israel engages in a massive bombing campaign in the Strip. On a single day, they killed 48 children. Along with the 1,000 ceasefire violations, 400 dead Palestinians. I think I've read that averages out to 5 a day. I haven't actually done the math myself, but a significant number of Palestinians are dying every single day from Israeli gunfire. And this doesn't include the fact that Israel is still using the humanitarian situation to kill Palestinians. Since the start of the ceasefire, I think about a dozen children have died either from malnutrition or the weather. Essentially, they freeze to death. Their tent floods and they drown or freeze to death, hypothermia. So there's a lot of Palestinians dying, unfortunately.
So something that I think is interesting about all this, as your auto camera is giving us the most fantastic
this is a
view.
first
Yes.
for me. I'm gonna try to unzoom myself here.
Okay, well, while you're working on that, what? It's literally magic. Look at that, Kyle Anzalone. Why haven't you ended the wars yet when you can literally wave your hand and make things so? But a little bit more seriously, something that always kind of rubs me the wrong way is that when you talk strictly about ceasefire and strictly about militant factions and their actual armed engagement, I mean that's obviously what gets the headlines. But I think what I keep coming back to is, while I don't want to excuse a breaking of the ceasefire on either side, if there are Hamas militants that are breaking the ceasefire, that are firing on Israeli patrols or whatever, that's certainly going to invoke provocation. But that's right. The real phrase, right, is invoking provocation. So when Israel and when the IDF continues to block aid, when convoys were promised to bring in, and especially right now, I understand there's lots of storms and bad weather going on in Gaza, and these people are basically, I mean, they're getting trench foot because they're living in a couple of feet of water in flimsy tents, and aid that they were promised from the international community is literally being blocked at the checkpoints. That not invoking provocation in the same way?
Absolutely. And that is one, I think the big problems with the ceasefire is that Israel got to keep its iron grip around the neck of Gaza and could essentially cut aid off at any time and strangle the population, right? Everybody
Mhm.
there is essentially dependent on aid. Almost everyone is living outside their homes, whether it's in bombed out buildings or schools that have been turned into shelters or these tents, which, by the way, imagine you sleeping in a tent every night for 2 years, just what the condition of that tent would be.
Sure.
And now a few years later, a lot of these tents are absolutely battered. So when it rains, it leaks, it drips. Um, the places where these tents are not former cities, right? They're areas that are prone to flooding and weren't meant to handle hundreds of thousands of people. And so like latrines and other, places to defecate are flooding, and this is causing, sewage, which is going to lead to more cholera and other kinds of deaths. So this is just a real nightmare, and that's been imposed on the Palestinians by the Israelis. One of the things that Israel agreed to do both in the first ceasefire and in this one was to basically allow a mobile housing, I'm guessing tiny homes and things like that. That way, you're elevated off the ground, you have significant shelter from the storm and the weather, and people could maybe not, live lives because they don't have food and markets to go to and or money to buy food at this point anyways. There's no jobs and things like that coming in. But to the extent that they have homes, at least they have somewhere to put their belongings where they're not going to get wet or destroyed, and to like make sure their kids have like a clean and safe place to sleep at night, which they don't currently have. But Israel has blocked those. So yeah, Israel is violating the ceasefire in every sense that exists. And Hamas, Alan, I will say one thing I have been surprised with. They've returned 27 of the 28 bodies of Israeli captives. And there were even statements from U.S. officials before the ceasefire suggesting it was very possible that Hamas only knew where 14 of the bodies were. So that they found all these bodies and turned them over so quickly, I think is a real indication that Hamas has tried to comply with this ceasefire. And it's really the Israelis that are the ones trying to break it, because they don't want Trump's ultimate deal to go through, right? They don't want to rebuild Gaza. They want to leave the Palestinians. And this was a plan proposed by who was then the security minister, strategic affairs minister of Israel, Ron Dermer, actually an American who's now also an Israeli. And he was probably the closest person to Netanyahu. He since left the government. I don't know if that suggests he had a falling out with the Israeli leader, but I'm just trying to say, like, I think this is a very serious plan. Like, this wasn't just something floated out there by an Israeli official. And he says, the Arab states will never agree to take the Palestinians in unless they view it as an act of charity. And the Arab states have always refused to do this because they don't want to aid and abet the Israeli genocide, right? If you agree, if you're Egypt, you agree to open up your borders, then Israel is going to drive out all the Palestinians right away. And so the Palestinians and the Egyptians don't want to let the Palestinians in for the protection of the Egyptians. But if all the kids are getting cholera and starving to death, and pregnant women are, delivering babies that weigh like 2 or 3 pounds, then suddenly these states could start to take in hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, maybe the children first, right? And so any children that has a health condition is allowed to leave Gaza, but that also includes his mother and his father and then his siblings. And so this is a way you could export a large portion of the population, and it would be seen as an act of charity, not an act of genocide. And so that really is the goal, is to make sure the conditions are so deplorable they could eventually force all the Palestinians out.
Something that I correct me wrong, something I believe you and I may have spoken about several months ago now, because unfortunately this crisis has been going on that long, is the fact that when you have negotiated ceasefires that then are immediately ignored, when you have these power disparities and these yellow lines, when you have promises of aid and then the aid is blocked, when you have the United States specifically involved in these discussions, but they're arming one of the belligerents, they're arming Israel. And of course, that could be said for a variety of other conflicts as well, whether it's Israel-Iran or whether it's Israel-Syria, Israel-Lebanon, and not just involving Israel and other parts of the world as well. Something that I'm really afraid of is when the United States continues to sort of play things off as, well, we're not directly involved. We say out of one side of our mouth that we wish for peace, but out of the other side of our mouths, we're arming one of the belligerents. We have an agenda. I'm afraid that with each passing example, future diplomacy becomes less and less likely, because why would any armed faction in any part of the world ever sit down at the diplomatic table with anyone represented by the United States? Why would they do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, under Biden, they brokered the ceasefire with Lebanon between Hezbollah and Israel. And Hezbollah, has almost completely complied with that ceasefire. Hezbollah is withdrawn from southern Israel. I think they've conducted one cross-border attack where they hit an empty field in Israel with a missile after Israel bombed southern Lebanon hundreds of times. And so, that's like one small act of defiance as the other country is violating the ceasefire every day. And Israel has maintained its occupation of southern Lebanon. And now they're asking for Hezbollah to be completely disarmed and demand that the Lebanese government will do it, which could possibly lead to a civil war, which I think Israel is probably intentionally trying to provoke, because the best situation for Israel in Lebanon is similar to Syria. It's not like a particular preference for the Sunnis or the Shias or the Christians to come out on top, but rather for the state to be so weak and fractured and unable to defend itself that Israel could take what it wants, and the state government, right, Damascus or Beirut or any of these other capitals, don't have the influence and the means necessary to actually stand up to Israel as they conduct a genocide against the Palestinians, right? Like, while the goal in Syria from the American side was to remove Assad, from the Israeli side, they saw the best scenario being this war going on in perpetuity, because if Assad is fighting Al-Qaeda in the north and ISIS in the east, then they're not paying attention and they can't do anything about the Israeli occupation and expanded settlements in the Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory that was seized by Israel. And now that, with the fall of Assad, they were able to capitalize on that and then take a large swath of southern Syria. And, that's one example. The Iran deal is another example where Trump takes office. The Iranians reluctantly return to the negotiating table. And as the Iranians are agreeing to concessions and we're getting closer and closer to an agreement, on the eve of talks between the U.S. and Israel and Qatar, not the U.S. and Israel, the U.S., Iran, and Qatar, Israel launches an aggressive war, a completely unprovoked war against the Iranians that ultimately draws in the Americans. And so, yeah, because of our power and military might and our willingness to send our wealth around the world for completely pointless conflicts that do nothing to help Americans out, because of that, Washington still does have a lot of influence around the globe, and other countries are going to continue to have to deal with and get the approval of the United States of America. However, I do think we're going to increasingly see countries turn to China in particular, like we saw a couple of years ago with China brokering an agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia to move towards normalization, that as the U.S. is less able to flex our military might and send endless amounts of money around the world, China will start to kind of fill that vacuum as a diplomatic player on the global stage.
I feel like we're gonna have to put a pin in anything China related, because we could do hours on end on a totally separate show talking just about how decades of the U.S. trying to enforce its hegemony via war and countries turning to China for peace, and yet China being brand, propagandized as the big bad guy. I don't want to go there, because if we go there, then our 30-minute episode is ruined and we'll never recover. But one more thing I wanted to bring up before we move on, something that I'd mentioned to you in the pre-show is, we've had the great Dave DeCamp on the show, who also covers these things extensively, and I know that you generate so much content for your own show, for the Libertarian Institute, for Anywar.com, and I feel like I don't know how you can do it and not just be weighed down by what I call tragedy fatigue. It just seems like every single time I pull up social media, here's more pictures of bombed out buildings and dead kids, and more tragedy. And I just think to myself, I don't want to be desensitized to these things, right? Because I want them to have weight. This should have impact. We should know how terrible these things are and want them to stop. And yet at the same time, when it's just every day, all the time, it's just, more death, more starving children. I'm afraid that the average American, who you and I are already struggling to reach, right? Because you know what? I mean, they got lives to live, they got bills to pay. I get it, But when they see that stuff all the time, I feel like you just get so used to it being normal that it just whoosh, it flies over your head. How do you do it, Kyle? How do you cover this stuff? And it's just every single day, where did the missiles strike today? Let me just replace the names and dates, but it's essentially the same story. How do you do it?
Yeah, so people have asked me this over the years, and the answer I usually give is I definitely had kind of built some skills for dealing with doing this on a daily basis. After I got out of college, I worked in community mental health with people who had schizophrenia. And then I worked in a therapy school with kids who had typically PTSD, past trauma, really just horrific things that happened to some of these particularly young girls. And, to kind of see them struggle with it on a daily basis, you really got to just learn how to cope with that. And I think, I was able to, it's very different. It's almost easier this way because it's less personal. Even if it's worse things happening to people, I don't know them. A lot of these kids, a lot of the people I had schizophrenia, I liked them. They were generally nice people who, just had this really either horrific thing happen to them or had this horrific mental illness. And they would do incredibly destructive things to their own lives because of it. And so you find ways to kind of deal with that and just, how you go about your life outside of, my job is a big part of that. But then a few days ago, I was actually thinking about this because I scrolled past the story. I'm looking for something to write up, either an update on the war in Ukraine or Israeli airstrikes in Gaza that day, a story I was going to write for judgenap.com. And I come across this story of 18 people being killed in a bus crash in Guatemala. And, I don't even consider writing that up. And I kind of think about why would I write up a story about 3 people dying in Gaza versus 18 people dying in Guatemala? And, I thought about it, and I think the answer is, well, I do this because I think I'm going to have some impact because, I cover foreign policy that's almost solely related to U.S., what's going on in the U.S. So if a bomb goes off in Gaza, I know that's only happening because of the support the U.S. gives the Israeli government. And so I think that's what makes it doable. The fact that Americans have to be upset about this. And that's one of the things that I try to do, especially more on my show than in my articles, is not just cover, the horrible things that are happening in Gaza, but explain that this is happening because of the United States of America and also the potential consequences, not just the financial money, the bombs that we're sending to Israel and things like that, but the blowback terrorism that could come to the United States of America because of this. And so I guess I view what I'm doing as important, and also somebody should do it, but also try to link it to why it's important to Americans. And I think that's all things that help me kind of deal with the fact that we are looking at pictures of dead kids every day, and it really does suck.
Well, that's something I didn't know about you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now I understand how you can be a 49ers fan. You've been trained to cope with trauma. So it makes perfect sense. But something I want to move on to before we completely run out of time. Some other stuff that you've written recently to touch a little bit about on Russia Ukraine, since that's forever in the news, but definitely back in the news this cycle. A couple of things that you've written over just the last so many days. You have JD Vance commenting that he's not very confident that Ukraine and Russia is going to reach a deal to end the war. And then vice versa, you have Donald Trump having conversations with Putin, having conversations with Zelensky, and he says the talks are going okay. So to touch on that and kind of take us home, where do you fit in? Are you pessimistic? Are you optimistic? Are you somewhere in the middle? I'm seeing news literally as we're getting ready to go on. I'm seeing headlines saying Russia's still on the march. The Ukrainians are retreating, and yet I'm seeing other headlines saying European defense stocks are taking a hit because they're afraid there might actually be peace. God forbid the military-industrial complex may miss a check if war ends in Eastern Europe. So there different people have different opinions on if this thing is going the right direction or not. So where are you on all that?
Yeah, I'm not very optimistic about the prospects for talk. Although today, even the Russians did say that things have gotten better since Donald Trump took over as far as negotiations go. The Americans are saying that 90% of the issues are resolved. The problem is, it's like saying, you're buying a car and you and the dealer have agreed on the warranty, oil change program, and a bunch of other things, but you're $10,000 apart on the price still. Like the 10% of things that still matter are the most important things. And that's the territory, particularly the Donbass, which this is something in that story I wrote about JD Vance that I mentioned, that Vance says one of the biggest issues is Donetsk, which is one of the two areas of the Donbass, which is the region of eastern Ukraine that Russia has annexed. About 20% Donetsk, I think now it's probably about 15% of that area is controlled by the Ukrainians. And Russia is saying that to end this war, Ukraine has to withdraw from this area and allow Russia to take it over. Ukraine saying that they absolutely refuse to do that. And in fact, they're still demanding that Russia agree to withdraw from some areas of Ukraine. And of course, just the reality on the battlefield is Russia is taking territory. JD Vance said Ukraine could only hold this territory for another year. And so it seems to me, honestly, on the earliest that we could get a deal done is probably 6 months to 9 months from now, when Russia has finally conquered all the Donbass. And then Ukraine doesn't have to make further territorial concessions to end the war. Although I should say, who knows, by that point in time, Russia may be demanding more territory. If they're on the advance, if they're 3 months away from capturing some significant city down south in Kherson or Zaporizhia, maybe they say you have to now see this city or we'll just take it by force. So the territory is a major issue, although time could resolve that one. NATO membership, Ukraine has said, we no longer want to be a member of NATO. And then they say, now this issue has been resolved. The problem is Zelensky wants a formal alliance with the United States, and they say this similar to an Article 5 style guarantee. Article 5 is the provision of the NATO charter that's interpreted as a mutual defense pact. And so maybe, this is acceptable to the Russians. However, NATO is now conducting Article 5 drills involving the Ukrainians. And so this is clearly just a backdoor into NATO and far short of the neutrality that Russia is asking for. So that's a major issue. And then future sanctions on Russia, the frozen Russian funds, there's about $300 billion of those in the West. Some of those have already been spent to aid Ukraine, although like a small portion, probably enough that both sides could let it go in order to end this conflict and just eat the cost of a few $1 billion there. But, the West wants to use that money to rebuild Ukraine post-war. I do think Donald Trump could probably go to Putin and say, look, we're giving you a lot of land and you're going to pay for that land, and $100 billion is a really good deal. You're getting 4 regions of Ukraine, $100 billion. There's a lot of minerals there, and you're going to pay for those, like some kind of pitch like that, and they get over that issue. But the territory and future NATO membership are major, major issues that have not been resolved whatsoever.
Well, on that note, I know we're running out of time, but I feel compelled, with it being the time of the year that it is, we're staring 2026 in the face. I want us to dig deep and find some optimism. If it's not on this topic in particular, with the new year right around the corner, is there anything globally in all the things you cover, any major policy news, anything at all, or even if it's just personal, whatever it may be, that is making you feel a little bit of optimism as we go into the new year?
Man, I mean, the really only answer is my family there. It has to be personal. I mean, hell, look, I am a 49ers fan, and Nick Bosa and Fred Warner went down. Brock Purdy didn't play half the season, and now have a potential for a first round bye going into the playoffs. The Super Bowl's in Santa Clara. I mean, this could be a real magical beginning as far as that size goes for 2026. But Trump seems like he's losing his mental faculties to me. He's let absolute bumbling fools like Marco Rubio dictate large portions of his foreign policy. He's held on to Pete Hegseth even after the Singlegate scandal. I mean, I really don't see any reason to be optimistic on the foreign policy front. And look, I mean, this is just me and the people I talk to, but things don't seem to be getting any better domestically in the United States. I mean, at least he shut down the border, but then he's allowed his immigration policies to be conducted so cruelly that I think he's actually probably starting to shift the American culture back away from, being anti-immigrant, which is going to probably open the next Democratic administration up to having some popular support to reopening the borders. I mean, I don't see anything real positive on the political front in 2026.
Well, sorry folks, I did my best. We couldn't talk any sense into Kyle about his 49ers thoughts. There's no hope for the future except for the 49ers, apparently. But Kyle, with you being the last guest for us of 2026 or 2025, excuse me, and hopefully we see you more than once or twice in 2026. I have a feeling that we probably will. We have to get you out of here on one last great question. Kyle, are you ready?
Right. Never.
Is a corn dog a Wellington?
Yes.
That is correct. A corn dog is indeed a Wellington. Take that, Tom Woods. Wrong once again, but Kyle is right once again. Kyle, I'm gonna have to go back and check the tape, but I think that you might currently you've got the volume stats. See, that's what it is. You've got the volume stats. I think you have the most total correct answers. Maybe not.
Oh, there's no way that's true. I think this is the second one I got right. And I should just disclose to the audience that you asked this question to my producer before you were on my show on Monday or on Friday. So, this is that I couldn't intentionally get it wrong.
Okay, well, if you don't threaten me with a good time. I could ask you if nachos are a salad.
No.
Oh, sorry, but nachos are indeed a salad. That's a damn shade. So see, I've done the announcer jinx. You lined up for the chip shot field goal to send the 49ers to the Super Bowl, and I said, oh, this guy hardly ever misses. And then wide left, nachos are indeed. Kyle, thank you so much, buddy. Have a happy new year.
You as well, Alan.